In today's video, I'm going to tell you the detailed story of Harumi, a Japanese telegraph operator captured during World War II who expected nothing but hatred and violence from her American captors. But when she finally gathered the courage to ask a young guard through tears, "You don't hate us?" his answer shattered everything she believed. This true story reveals how a simple conversation between enemies became the moment that changed dozens of lives and helped reshape an entire nation's understanding of humanity. October 1945, Manila's outskirts still bore the scars of brutal urban warfare. Harumi crouched in the ruins of a communications building with 19 other women, all members of the Imperial Japanese Navy's telegraph corps. They had spent weeks trapped in the basement, surviving on rainwater and moldy rice, listening as American artillery grew closer each day. Now, with nowhere left to run, they huddled together in the darkness, waiting. Harumi was 19 years old. She had been recruited straight from a girls' technical academy in Osaka, where she'd shown exceptional aptitude for Morse code. Her instructors told her she would serve the emperor with honor. They never mentioned she might end up trapped in a foreign city, surrounded by enemies, rehearsing her own death. The propaganda had been clear and relentless. American soldiers were animals who showed no mercy to Japanese women. Capture meant unspeakable horrors followed by execution. Officers had distributed cyanide capsules to female personnel months earlier. Harumi kept hers sewn into the lining of her uniform collar, checking it obsessively with trembling fingers. She had promised herself she would take it before the Americans reached her. When the basement door finally burst open, flooding the darkness with harsh sunlight, several women screamed. Others pressed poison capsules to their lips. Harumi squeezed her eyes shut and waited for gunfire. Instead, she heard a voice speaking slow, careful Japanese words, telling them to come out, that they would not be harmed, that they needed medical attention. The words made no sense. Harumi kept her eyes closed, certain it was a trick designed to lure them into the open for easier execution. But minutes passed with no shots fired. Eventually, hands pulled her gently to her feet and guided her toward the light. When she finally opened her eyes, blinking against the brightness, she saw young American soldiers looking at her, not with hatred, but with something she couldn't identify. Was it concern? Pity? The first shock. The women were loaded into trucks and driven through ruined streets to a compound on the city's edge. Harumi sat rigid with fear, convinced each turn brought them closer to execution grounds. Instead, they stopped at a cluster of newly constructed buildings surrounded by fencing. Guards directed them into a processing area where female American nurses waited with clipboards and medical supplies. What happened next defied every expectation Harumi carried. The nurses examined them with clinical efficiency but also surprising gentleness. They treated infected wounds, distributed clean clothes, and provided hot tea. When one of the Japanese women collapsed from exhaustion, 2 nurses immediately rushed to her aid, calling for a stretcher and oxygen. Harumi watched in confusion as they worked to save a woman who had been their enemy hours earlier. That first night, lying on a clean cot in a barracks with electric lights and running water, Harumi couldn't sleep. Her mind raced with contradictions. The propaganda had promised barbarism. Instead, she'd been given medical care, food, and shelter. Around her, other women whispered similar confusions. Some insisted it was temporary, that the cruelty would begin once the Americans had finished their deception. Others remained silent, too exhausted or traumatized to process what was happening. Harumi touched the cyanide capsule still hidden in her collar. She hadn't needed it, not yet anyway. But she kept it close, just in case the nightmare everyone predicted was simply delayed. The question that changed everything. 3 weeks passed. The routine of camp life became familiar. Morning roll call, breakfast in a mess hall where food was abundant and varied. Work assignments sorting supplies or assisting with administrative tasks, evening free time before lights out. The Americans treated them not as hated enemies but as prisoners requiring basic dignity and care. Harumi was assigned to work in the camp's supply depot, helping inventory shipments that arrived daily. It was there she began interacting regularly with Corporal James Mitchell, a young guard from Iowa who had been assigned to supervise the Japanese workers. He was 23, with sandy hair and a quick smile that appeared despite the haunted look in his eyes that betrayed the horrors he'd witnessed in combat. Mitchell tried to learn Japanese phrases. His pronunciation was terrible, making some of the women giggle despite themselves when he mangled simple greetings. He brought them water without being asked, moved heavy boxes they struggled with, and showed them photographs of his family's farm back home. His kindness seemed genuine, but Harumi remained cautious. Trust felt impossible after everything she'd been taught. One afternoon, while sorting crates of canned goods, Harumi noticed Mitchell staring at nothing, his jaw clenched tight. She recognized that look. She'd seen it on Japanese soldiers' faces near the war's end, when defeat became inevitable and the weight of loss became too heavy to hide. Without thinking, she approached him. "Are you sad?" She asked in broken English she'd been secretly practicing. Mitchell startled, then gave her a weak smile. "Just thinking about buddies who didn't make it home." He paused, then added, "Lost a lot of good men to Japanese artillery." On Saipan. The words hung between them like a blade. Harumi's hands trembled. Here was the truth she'd been waiting for. The hatred she'd expected would now reveal itself. She took a step back, preparing to run, but Mitchell didn't move. He just looked tired. Something inside Harumi broke. Months of fear, confusion, and suppressed emotion overwhelmed her. Tears streamed down her face as words tumbled out in Japanese, then fractured English. "You don't hate us?" she sobbed. "Your friends die because of Japan. Because of us. Why you give us food? Why you not hurt us? We are enemy. Why you don't hate us?" Mitchell stood quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady but soft. "Yeah, I'm angry about what happened. Angry at the war, angry at the orders that sent us all here to kill each other. But you?" He gestured to Harumi and the other women nearby. "You didn't start this war. You're just caught in it, same as me. Hating you won't bring my friends back. It won't fix anything." He pulled out his canteen and offered it to her. "My mom taught me that hate just makes more hate. Said the only way to stop it is to choose something different. So that's what I'm trying to do." Harumi took the canteen with shaking hands. She drank, then asked the question that terrified her most. "What happens to us? When do we die?" Mitchell's eyes widened in shock. "Die? You're not going to die. You're prisoners of war. When this is all sorted out, you'll go home to Japan." Home? The word felt foreign. Harumi had been so certain death was inevitable that she'd never imagined a future beyond these fences. "Yeah, home." Mitchell's smile was genuine this time. "Might take a while, but you'll get there. War's over. No more killing." That conversation spread through the camp like wildfire. The other women pressed Harumi for every detail. Some refused to believe it, insisting Mitchell had lied to deceive her. But others, who had experienced their own small kindnesses from American personnel, began to wonder, what if it was true? What if they really would survive? The collapse of belief. Over the following weeks, the foundations of Harumi's worldview crumbled piece by piece. She watched American doctors work tirelessly to save a Japanese woman with pneumonia, using precious penicillin without hesitation. She saw guards share cigarettes and chocolate with prisoners, asking nothing in return. She received letters from American church groups offering prayers and support for women they'd never met. The abundance shocked her most. Growing up in wartime Japan, Harumi had known only scarcity. Rice rations grew smaller each year, sugar disappeared entirely. Her family burned furniture for heat during the final winter. Meanwhile, propaganda insisted America was suffering equally, that victory was inevitable because American weakness would collapse under pressure. Now she saw the truth. Supply trucks arrived daily loaded with food, medicine, clothing, and equipment. Nothing was rationed. Waste shocked her. Half-eaten meals thrown away, damaged goods discarded instead of repaired, resources treated as limitless. The casual abundance proved more devastating than any speech. Everything Japan had promised about American weakness was a lie. Harumi began attending English classes offered by camp administrators. She learned to read American newspapers, shocked by articles that criticized government decisions and military actions. In Japan, such dissent would mean imprisonment or death. Here, disagreement was printed openly, discussed freely. Democracy wasn't the chaos she'd been taught. It was order built on truth instead of fear. She wrote her first letter to an American pen pal, a schoolteacher in California who had volunteered to correspond with Japanese prisoners. The woman's response arrived weeks later, filled with warmth and curiosity about life in Japan. She asked about Harumi's family, her education, her dreams for the future. She treated Harumi not as an enemy but as a person deserving of kindness and respect. Transformation. Mitchell became something unexpected, a friend. Their conversations grew longer and more personal. He told her about growing up on a farm, about his dreams of becoming a teacher after the war, about the girlfriend waiting for him back in Iowa. Harumi shared memories of her childhood in Osaka, of cherry blossom festivals and her mother's cooking, of the technical academy where she'd learned telegraphy. One day, Mitchell brought his guitar to the supply depot. "Music helps," he said simply, and began playing soft folk songs. Other guards and prisoners gradually gathered, drawn by the sound. Mitchell taught them an American song called "You Are My Sunshine." The women hummed along, then some began singing in halting English. Japanese melodies followed, tentative at first, then stronger as confidence grew. In that moment, singing together despite everything that had divided them, Harumi felt something shift inside her. The war had made them enemies by decree, but humanity connected them in ways propaganda couldn't destroy. She looked around at American soldiers and Japanese prisoners sharing music and realized the truth. They were all just young people who wanted to go home. The question answered. 6 months into her captivity, Harumi was called to the camp commander's office. Fear seized her. Had she done something wrong? Was punishment finally coming? Instead, she found Mitchell waiting with news. Repatriation was being arranged. Within weeks, she would board a ship back to Japan? "You're going home," Mitchell said, grinning. "Just like I told you." Harumi burst into tears. She had believed him, but some small part of her had still doubted. Now it was real. She would see her family again. She would survive. "Thank you," she managed in English. "Thank you for not hating us." Mitchell's expression grew serious. "You asked me that question months ago. Want to know the real answer?" He waited until she nodded. "I did hate, at first. Hated every Japanese soldier, every plane, everything that killed my friends. But hate was eating me alive. It wasn't hurting Japan. It was hurting me." He gestured around the camp. "Then I got assigned here and met you all. And I realized something. You were just as scared as me. Just as lied to by your leaders. Just as desperate to survive. How could I hate you for that? You're not my enemy. War was the enemy. It caught all of us." Harumi understood then. The question she'd asked through tears months ago hadn't just been about Mitchell's feelings. It had been about whether humanity could survive hatred, whether kindness could exist between enemies, whether people could choose compassion even when vengeance seemed justified. Mitchell had answered with his actions every day since that first conversation. And in doing so, he'd helped her answer a deeper question. What kind of person would she choose to be after the war ended? Going home. The day Harumi boarded the ship to Japan, she stood on deck watching the Philippine coast fade. Beside her stood other women from the telegraph corps, all transformed by their months in captivity. They weren't the terrified, propaganda-fed soldiers who'd hidden in that basement a year earlier. They'd become witnesses to something unexpected, the power of choosing humanity over hatred. Harumi carried letters from Mitchell and other guards, messages of hope for Japan's rebuilding. She carried memories of abundance that proved her nation's propaganda was lies. Most importantly, she carried the knowledge that enemies could become friends when given the chance, that hatred wasn't inevitable, that compassion could survive even war's worst horrors. When the ship docked in Yokohama, Harumi stepped onto soil scarred by bombing but alive with reconstruction. Japan had lost everything, but in that loss lay opportunity for rebirth. She and women like her brought home stories of American kindness, of democracy functioning through dissent, of abundance built on freedom rather than conquest. Many became teachers, sharing lessons learned in captivity. Others entered politics, advocating for democratic reforms. Some maintained correspondence with American friends, building bridges between former enemies. All carried forward the truth that had changed them. Hatred was a choice, and so was compassion. The legacy. Years later, when historians asked Harumi about her experience as a prisoner of war, she always returned to that moment in the supply depot. The question asked through tears, "You don't hate us?" And Mitchell's answer, given through actions more than words. "No. I choose something different." That choice, multiplied across thousands of interactions between captors and captives, helped transform Japan's relationship with America and with democracy itself. The women who returned home carried seeds of change planted by kindness instead of cruelty. They'd expected death but found humanity. They'd expected hatred but found compassion. And in that gap between expectation and reality, they discovered truth powerful enough to rebuild a nation. Harumi never forgot Mitchell's lesson. Hate makes more hate. The only way to stop it is to choose something different. That choice, made daily in small acts of kindness between enemies, proved more powerful than any weapon. It didn't erase the war's horrors or justify its violence. But it offered something beyond vengeance, the possibility of healing. When asked what moment defined her captivity, Harumi always answered the same way. Not the food or medicine or shelter, though those mattered. Not even the promise of going home, though that saved her life. The defining moment was being seen as human by someone who had every reason to hate her. Being offered water instead of violence. Being answered with compassion when she expected cruelty. "You don't hate us?" she had asked through tears. The answer changed everything.